"Find him," said the Duke of Kesgarth, and his voice cracked on the second word, and every man in the great hall flinched, because the most feared man in England did not ever let his voice crack. "I do not care what it costs. I do not care how many men. Take every horse in the stable, wake every village, search every ditch and barn and hedge in the county. My father is out there in this somewhere, cold and confused and frightened and alone, and I will not." He stopped. He made himself stop and steady and go on. "Find him. Bring him home. And God help the man who comes back to tell me he has given up looking, for I will not have given up, and neither will anyone in my service, until my father is found." They scattered into the storm. And Reynold, Duke of Kesgarth, took the fastest horse himself and rode out into the sleet at the head of them, because he could not do the thing his rank required, which was to stay warm and dry at Kesgarth, and wait for others to search not while his father was out in it. He had done this. That was the thing that rode with him through the freezing dark, worse than the cold, worse than the fear, the certainty that this was his fault, his father, old Duke Ulrich, who had been the warmest and the wisest man Reynold had ever known, who had raised a cold hard son and loved him anyway, who had been failing these 2 years in body and worse in mind, the great clear kind mind clouding over month by month like a window frosting in winter. His father had wandered off before ice confused and been found quickly, close to home. And Reynold, who feared nothing, who ruled 3 counties and was feared by all of them, had been too proud or too busy or too unwilling to face the full ruin of the man he loved, to do the thing he should have done, which was to keep his father safely watched every hour. He had told himself the old man was well enough. He had not wanted to admit how far gone he was. And now his father had wandered out in the worst storm of the winter in the dusk, unseen, and had been gone 6 hours before anyone marked it, and might be anywhere in 100 square miles of moor, and might already. Reynold did not let himself finish the thought. He rode. They searched all that night and found nothing, and the next day and the next, and the Duke of Kesgarth did not sleep and did not eat and did not stop, and the county, which feared him, watched the feared Duke ride himself and his men to exhaustion for love of a failing old man. And something in the county's long fear of him began, that terrible week. To shift for it is one thing, to fear a cold hard Duke, and another to watch that same Duke weep openly in a village square, because a searcher had brought false hope, and the two do not sit together. And the fear began to make room for something else. It was on the 4th day that they found the trailer carter who had seen 4 nights before a small figure helping a large stumbling one along the moor road in the sleet, and had thought nothing of it, alas, helping her drunken grandfather home, and gone on. And the direction the carter gave led away from every village, out toward the poorest edge of the moor, where a few scattered cottages clung to the bad land, and the Duke of Kesgarth turned his exhausted horse that way and rode, with a hope so painful he could barely breathe around it, toward a thread of smoke rising from a chimney at the moor's far edge. He came to the cottage, a poor, mean, one-room place, a spinner's cottage, its thatch-patched, its garden a few winter cabbages, and a coop of hens, and he flung himself off his horse and hammered on the door with his heart in his throat, and a girl opened it, a small brown poor girl of perhaps 19 in a mended gown, and Reynold could not speak, could only look past her into the firelit dark of the single room, and there, in a bed by the fire, warm and clean and quiet and alive, propped on pillows and sipping broth from a spoon the girl had plainly just set down, was his father. The Duke of Kesgarth, a sound he had never made in his life, crossed the little room in 2 strides, and fell on his knees beside the bed, and took his father's frail, warm, living hand in both of his, and the old man turned his clouded eyes toward him, for a wonder, for a mercy. Knew him one of the brief surfacings that came less and less often now, and said, in a thread of a voice, "Reynold, there you are, my boy. I have been telling this kind child about you. She would not believe you were a duke." And he smiled the old warm smile and drifted away again into the fog, still holding his son's hand. And Reynold, Duke of Kesgarth, the most feared man in England, knelt on a poor girl's floor and wept over his father's living hand and could not stop. 4 days and nights of terror and grief breaking out of him all at once, and when at last he could master himself enough to look up, he found the girl standing quietly by the fire, not frightened, not fawning, only watching him with a plain grave tenderness. And he understood that she had been watching a great man weep, and had had the rare grace to let him do it without a word. "You found him," he said, when he could speak. "You found my father. In the storm. 4 nights ago. You have had him here 4 nights. "I found him in a ditch on the moor road," the girl said, half frozen and out of his wits, "with no coat and no name he could give me, and I brought him home and warmed him and fed him and minded him, and he's mended a deal these 4 days, though his poor head comes and goes. I didn't know who he was, sir. He couldn't tell me. I only knew he was some poor soul someone was surely grieving, and I meant to get him back to whoever loved him the moment he was strong enough to say who that was." She looked at the weeping Duke, and at the old man's hand in his, and understanding came into her plain face. "And that's you, is it? You're the one who loves him. You're the son he kept trying to tell me of when his head cleared. My son, he'd say, my son will, and then it'd go again before he could finish. Well," her voice was very gentle, "he's safe, sir. He's warm and he's fed, and he's mended, and he's been no trouble but the sweetest old soul I ever minded, and you can stop your weeping now, because whatever you feared out there on the moor these 4 days, it didn't happen. He didn't die in the cold. He's yours. You've got him back." He learned, over that first day, the whole of what she had done, and each thing he learned humbled him further. The old Duke could not be moved at once he was mending, the girl said, but he was frail, and the 4 days had cost him. And to bundle him out into the cold and jolt him a 2 hours' ride to Kesgarth might undo all her nursing. Better to let him gather strength a few days more where he was warm and settled. And Renaud, who could have commanded 100 physicians and a padded carriage and every comfort money could buy, understood at once that the girl was right, that his father was better where he was, in the warm, quiet cottage, tended by the small brown hands that had already brought him back from the grave. And so the Duke of Kesgarth, who had never in his life deferred to anyone, deferred to a 19-year-old spinner about the care of his own father, because she plainly knew better than he did. And he had the wit to see it. He stayed. He sent a rider to Kesgarth with word that his father was found and safe, and orders for what was needed, and then he stayed in the poor cottage at the girl's fire and watched her tend his father and learned her. Her name was Fenwyn Nunnerly. She was an orphan, her parents dead, her grandmother dead these 2 years, alone in the world with a mortgaged cottage and a few hens and her spinning, keeping herself by the barest margin, 1 bad season from the workhouse. And this girl with nothing. 1 bad season from ruin herself had taken in a strange, dying old man who would eat food she could not spare and burn fuel she could not afford, and very likely die on her hands and leave her the cost of his burying. And she had done it, Renaud came to understand, without a moment's hesitation, without a thought for the cost, for no reason on earth, but that she could not walk past a dying man in a ditch. He made her tell him the whole of it, how she had found him, how she had got him the 1/4 mile home, half carrying a grown man through the sleet. How she had sat up 3 nights running with him, feeding him broth a spoonful at a time, warming stones for his feet, holding him through the shaking fits. How she had given him her own grandmother's bed and slept herself, these 4 nights on the cold floor by the hearth. "You slept on the floor," Renaud said, "so that my father might have your bed." "Well, he could hardly sleep on the floor, sir," in his Stenwin said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, "and it's only a floor for 4 nights, and I've slept on worse." "You needn't look at me like that. I did nothing anyone wouldn't do." "You did nothing anyone would do," said the Duke of Kesgarth, and his voice was not steady. "That is the thing you do not understand about yourself, Miss Nunnerly, and I am beginning to think you never will, because to you it is so plain and so obvious that you cannot see it is rare. Anyone would do it, you say. I am 34 years old, and I have lived among the greatest and wealthiest people in England my whole life, and I tell you plainly, almost no one would do it. Almost no one would take a dying stranger into a house they could barely keep, and spend food and fuel they could not spare, and sit up 3 nights, and give up their own bed and sleep on the floor, for a person who could give them nothing, who might well die anyway, who was nothing to them. The people I know would have gone to the village and told them there was a body in the ditch and let the parish deal with it, and thought themselves conscientious for troubling to mention it. You did not do the thing anyone would do. You did the thing almost no one does. And you did it for my father, who is the person I love most in this world, and who would be dead in a ditch on the moor tonight if you had been the sort of person the world is mostly made of, and I do not have the words, Miss Nunnally, I who am accustomed to having every word I want. I do not have the words to tell you what you have done for me, or what I owe you, or how the whole of my life would be a ruin tonight if you had walked past that ditch. Fenwin looked at him, and there was a colour in her cheeks now, and she said, You don't owe me anything. That's the part you've got wrong. Kindness isn't a debt. If I minded your father hoping to be paid, it wouldn't have been kindness, it would have been trade, and I'd not insult either of us by calling it the one when it was the other. I did it because it wanted doing, and I was the one there to do it. There's no bill. You don't owe me. And I'll tell you something, sir, since you're a great man and mightn't have heard it lately, the best things in this world are the ones no one owes for. A kindness paid for isn't a kindness. So put your owing away. Your father's safe, and that's my reward if I wanted one, which I don't to see a good old man safe and his son come for him weeping like his heart would break, which is a rare enough sight, a great lord who loves his old father like that, and worth more to watch than any payment. That's plenty. That's more than plenty. Now stop trying to pay me, and come and take your father's other hand, for his head's clearing again, I can see it, and he'll want you when it does. And there's no medicine in the world does him more good than his son's face when he surfaces. That's worth more than all you're owing to him and to me both. The old Duke stayed a week at the cottage in the end, for he was frailer than he seemed, and Fenwin would not have him moved until she was sure, and Renaud stayed with him, and it was the strangest, he came to think, the most important week of the Duke of Kesgarth's life. He had never lived poor. He had never spent a week in a one-room cottage, sharing a fire and a table, and the whole of a day with people who had nothing, had never, in 34 years, seen up close how the poor of his own lands actually lived, the margins they kept, the cold, the ceaseless work, the way a single hen's laying or a single bad debt could mean the difference between keeping a roof and losing it. He learned it that week at Fenwin Nunnally's fire, and it changed forever the way he understood the 3 counties he ruled for. It is one thing to know, in the abstract, that one's tenants are poor, and another to watch a girl reckon whether she can afford the fuel to keep an old man warm, and choose to burn it anyway, and go without herself. And he watched her all that week and fell in love with her, though it was some while before he let himself name it. He fell in love not with her face, though he came to find her plain face dearer than any beauty he had known, but with the whole of her, with the plain unhesitating goodness of her. The way she could not walk past a thing that needed doing, with her quick tongue and her refusal to be either frightened or flattered by his rank, with the tenderness with which she tended his failing father, patient and warm, and never once condescending to the ruin of the old man's mind, talking to him gently through his confusion, answering to whatever name his wandering head landed on, treating a duke gone childish with more dignity than most people managed toward a duke in his full powers. Renaud watched her care for his father, the person he loved most in the world, the person whose failing had been the great private grief of his life, the grief he could share with no one, because he was the feared Duke of Kesgarth, and could show no weakness, and he watched a poor girl carry that grief with him, lightly, warmly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to sit up nights with a great man's dying father and ease his last confusions. And he understood that he had found, in a spinner's cottage at the edge of the moor, the one thing his rank and his fortune had never been able to buy him, which was someone who would help him carry the thing he could not carry alone. He told her who they were, properly, on the 3rd day, for she had half guessed it, and he would not have her guessing. My father, he said, is Alric, Duke of Kesgarth. I hold the title now. He gave it over to me 2 years ago, when he first began to fail, so that the estate should be in sound hands while he was still clear enough to see them settled, which was the last wise thing his clear mind did before the fog came down. And I am Renaud, his son, the present Duke. You have been nursing the old Duke of Kesgarth, Miss Nunnally, in your grandmother's bed, and sleeping on your floor for him, and you did not know it, and it made no difference to you. Which is the whole reason I am telling you, because you treated a duke's father exactly as you would have treated a beggar's, with the same plain kindness, asking nothing, knowing nothing, and there is no finer thing I could say of any person than that. And I want you to know that I know it. Most people, learning who he was, would have changed toward him in an instant, grown, fawning, or calculating, or afraid. You knew nothing and gave everything, and now you know, and I do not think it will change you at all, and that is the rarest and best thing about you. Why would it change me? Fenwin asked, honestly puzzled. He's the same old man he was an hour ago. Dukes and beggars come to the same when they're cold in a ditch, sir. That's the one place the world's fair, the ditch. A frozen man is just a frozen man. And a frozen man's son weeping over him is just a son. And I've no more reason to fawn on him now I know his title than I had to scorn him when I thought him a nobody. He's a sweet old soul with a clouded head and a boy who loves him. And that's the whole of what matters about him. And it was true when I thought him a beggar, and it's true now you tell me he's a duke, and the title changes, nothing that signifies. She paused, and then, with the plain honesty that undid him a little more each time, though I'll own it frightens me a bit, sir. Now I know it not him, but you. A duke, in my cottage, weeping on my floor and owing me things I won't be owed. I'm a poor spinner and you're the greatest man in 3 counties, and once your father's mended and gone home, we'll not meet again. You and I, and that's as it should be, for the ditch may be fair, but the world above it isn't, and dukes and spinners don't keep company. So let's not pretend otherwise. Mind your father, and be glad he's safe, and when he's strong take him home to his fine house, and I'll go back to my hens and my spinning, and remember all my life, the week a duke wept on my floor for love of his father. Which is a fine thing to have seen and a finer to have helped, and it'll warm me many a winter. That's enough, that's a good end to it. Don't spoil it with owing, or with pretending we're anything to each other, but 2 people the ditch threw together for a week, which is a rare and lovely thing and doesn't need to be more. But the Duke of Kesgarth, kneeling by his father's bed in the poor warm firelight, looking at the plain brave girl who had just kindly shown him the door out her life, found that he did not want the door, and did not intend to take it, and had, in fact, already begun to understand that he was not going to be able to take his father home and go back to being the feared Duke of Kesgarth as though this week had never happened, because something had happened to him in this cottage that could not be undone, and her name was Fenwin Nunnerly. And he was not, whatever the world said about dukes and spinners, going to let the ditch throw her back. The week in the cottage taught the Duke of Kesgarth more about his own 3 counties than 34 years of ruling them had, and he never forgot the education. He had never lived poor, not for an hour. He had ruled the poor from a distance, dispensed justice and collected rents, and thought himself a conscientious landlord, because he did not actively grind his tenants, but he had never once seen, up close, what their poverty actually was, the daily texture and arithmetic of it. And that week, at Fenwin's fire, sharing her scant food and her single room, he saw it, and it shamed him and it changed him. He watched her reckon everything. He watched her count the eggs the hens gave and calculate whether there were enough to sell one in the village and still feed herself and the old man. Watched her measure the fuel against the cold and decide, each day, whether she could afford to keep the fire as high as his father needed. And keep it high anyway and go colder herself. He watched her mend and remend a gown already turned twice, because a new one was unthinkable. He watched her make a meal out of almost nothing, a handful of meal, an onion, the last of a back and bone kept for the flavor of a dozen dinners, and make it not merely sufficient but somehow warm and good, the art of a woman who had made much of little her whole life, and he understood, watching, that his tenants lived like this, all of them every day, one bad harvest or one sin from ruin on a margin so thin that a single unlooked-for expense a strange old man to feed, a fire kept high could be the difference between keeping the roof and losing it, and that he, their duke, had never once troubled to know it. You gave up an egg's selling, he said to her, on the 4th day, having watched her decide it, to keep my father in broth. That egg was a coin you needed, and you spent it on a stranger, and you did it without a flicker, as though it were nothing. It was nothing, Fenwin said. 1 egg. It was not nothing. It was a coin you could not spare, and there were 4 of them this week, 4 eggs unsold, 4 coins gone, on a margin I have watched you keep this week, and now understand you are 1 bad season from the workhouse, Fenwin. I have done the sums. I have seen your life, and you have spent, on my father, coins that stood between you and ruin, and called it nothing. He shook his head. I have ruled 3 counties of people who live exactly as you live on exactly this margin, and I never knew it. I dispensed my justice and collected my rents and thought myself a good landlord, and I never once knew what a bad harvest actually means to the people it falls on, or how thin the thread is that they live by, or what it costs a person on your margin to keep a fire high for a stranger. I have learned more of my own counties this week at your fire than in 34 years of ruling them, and I am ashamed of the 34 years, and I am not going to rule the same way again. That is the first thing your kindness has done, Fenwin. Before ever it touched my heart, it has opened my eyes to the lives of the people I rule, and I will be a different duke for it, a better one, and my tenants will never know that they have you to thank, a poor spinner who kept a fire high for a nameless old man and taught a blind duke, without meaning to, what his own people's lives are made of, and he was as good as his word. In the years that followed, for the education of that week went deep, and the Duke of Kestgarth became, having once seen poverty up close at a poor woman's fire, a landlord who ruled with the knowledge of what a bad season meant, who kept his rents fair and his relief ready and his eyes open, so that the 3 counties prospered under him as they had not under his cold blind youth. And it had begun before he ever loved her, had begun in the plain seeing of how she lived, the eggs unsold, the fire kept high, the margin she spent on a stranger without a flicker, so that Fenwin Nunnerly changed the whole of how the Duke of Kestgarth ruled 3 counties before she had done anything but nurse his father, simply by letting him see, for 1 week, the life of the poor from the inside, which no amount of ruling from above had ever shown him. You are a strange education, Fenwin Nunnerly, he told her at the week's end. I came to your cottage to find my father, and I have found, instead, the whole of what I did not know about my own life's work. I did not know how my people lived, I know now, and I will spend the rest of my life a better duke for it, and it is the least of what I owe you, and you do not even count it, because to you it was only a week of keeping a fire high for an old man, which is nothing, 1 egg. It is not nothing. It is the education of a duke, and you gave it to me without knowing you gave it, the way you give everything, not counting the cost, not marking the gift, just doing the kind thing, because you cannot do otherwise, and letting the rewards, if any come, be surprises. I have never met anyone like you. I did not know there were people like you. And I begin to think that meeting you may turn out to be the most important thing that ever happened to me, and I have only known you a week, and my father is not even mended yet, and I am already, God help me, unable to imagine going home to Kestgarth and never seeing your fire again. She told him that same week about her grandmother, and it explained the whole of where the stopping came from. My grandmother raised me, Fenwin said, sitting by the fire in the evening while the old duke slept. After my parents died I was small. I barely remember them. It was my own mother who made me, and she was exactly like this, sir, like me, I mean, only more so. She could not walk past a thing that needed doing to save her life. This cottage was never empty in her day. There was always some soul in it that she'd taken in, a sick traveller, a runaway girl, an orphan, an old body with no one. She'd feed the whole parish out of a pot that hardly held enough for us 2, and when the neighbours told her she'd beggar herself with her taking in, she'd say, well, and if I do, I'll have beggared myself the right way, which is more than most manage. She died with nothing less than nothing. There were debts because she'd spent her whole life giving away what she didn't have to people who couldn't repay her, and the parish that had scolded her for it turned out for a funeral in such numbers as the church had never held. Because there wasn't a soul in 3 villages she hadn't fed or nursed or taken in at some low point, and they came, all of them, to bury the poor woman who'd stopped for every one of them. I was 12. I stood at her grave and watched half the county weep for a woman who died with nothing. And I understood, even then, that she'd been the richest person any of them knew, rich in the only wealth that lasts, which is the love of people you've stopped for, and I decided at her grave, at 12, that I'd be exactly like her, and spend my life the same way, and die with nothing and be wept for by the whole county, because I'd seen it done and I knew it was the only life worth living. The Duke of Kestgarth listened and understood, and loved her the more for it. So it is not even yours, the stopping, he said. It came down to you, from her. It came down to me from her, and to her from wherever she got her own mother, likely. It goes back. These things go back, Fenwin said. That's the thing about it, sir, the thing I've thought about since I was 12. Warmth is inherited, same as coldness, only nobody talks of it. Your kind inherit cold. You've told me a little of your own upbringing, your cold mother, the world teaching you hardness, and it goes down the generations, cold breeding cold. And my kind inherit warmth. When we're lucky enough to have a grandmother like mine, it goes down the same way, warmth breeding warmth. The stopping passed from her to me at her fire the way she must have got it at someone's fire before. It's all inheritance, the warm and the cold both. And the only question, for any of us, is which we pass on, for we all pass on one or the other, to our children, to whoever we raise, whether we mean to or not. My grandmother passed me warmth, I'll pass it to mine, if I ever have any, God willing. And your mother and the cold world passed you cold, but here's the thing, sir, the hopeful thing, the thing I hold to. The chain can be broken, or rather it can be switched, cold to warm, if a person decides to. You could break the cold you inherited and pass warmth to your children instead. If you chose to hard enough, if you found the warmth somewhere to learn it from. It's harder that way to switch the inheritance, to warm a cold line than just to pass on the warmth you were given, as I'll do. But it can be done, and a man who does it, who takes a cold inheritance and switches it to warm, and passes warmth to children who'd have got cold, does a greater thing than I ever will, because I'm only passing on what I was given, and he's changing the whole direction of a line. That's the finest thing a person could do, I think. Break a cold inheritance and start a warm one. Most never even see that it's possible. But it is. I've thought so since I was 12, at my grandmother's grave, watching the richest poor woman in the county be wept for by half of it. And the Duke of Kestgarth sitting by a fire, listening to a poor spinner explain the inheritance of warmth and cold, understood that she had just described, without knowing it, the exact thing his own father had wanted for him, and the exact thing he was, that very week, beginning to do, to take the cold inheritance the world had given him and switch it warm, so that his own children, when they came, should inherit warmth where he had inherited cold. And he understood, too, that he could not do it alone, that a man cannot switch a cold inheritance to warm out of nothing, that he needed to learn the warmth from somewhere, from someone who had it to teach, and that he was sitting across a poor fire from exactly that someone. A woman who had inherited warmth from a grandmother and could pass it to him as she meant to pass it to her children, if only he could find a way to stay near her long enough to learn it. And it was, he thought, the strongest reason yet, stronger even than his love, that he could not go home to Kestgarth and let the ditch throw her back, because she was not only the woman he loved, but the one person who could teach a cold man to be warm, and hand a cold line the warmth to switch its whole inheritance. And he needed her. His children not born needed her. And he was not going to let her go. He took his father home to Kestgarth at the week's end, in a padded carriage, wrapped warm. With Fenwin's careful instructions written out in Reynolds's own hand, though he could have paid a physician to remember them, within 3 days the old Duke began to fail again, and Reynolds understood why, and it gave him the reason he had been looking for his father. Home at grand cold Kestgarth among the physicians and the soft-footed servants and every luxury money could buy, fretted and declined and grew more clouded and more frightened than he had been in the poor warm cottage, and Reynolds, watching, understood that his father did not want the physicians or the luxury, that what had steadied and warmed and eased the old man in his last confusions had not been any comfort money could buy, but Fenwin Nunnally, her plain warm voice, her patient hands, the particular way she had of talking a frightened, wandering old man back to calm. His father had bonded to her in his fog the way a frightened child bonds to the one kind face, and taken from Kestgarth, deprived of her, he pined. So the Duke of Kestgarth went back to the cottage on the moor, and asked Fenwin Nunnally to come to Kestgarth. My father is failing, he said plainly, for he had learned that plainness was the only currency she valued, fast at home, than he did in your cottage. The physicians can find nothing new wrong. There is nothing new wrong. He is dying slowly, as he has been for 2 years, and no one can stop it. But there is a difference between dying frightened and dying at peace, and in your cottage he was at peace, and at Kestgarth he is frightened. And the difference, Miss Nunnally, is you. You steadied him, you eased his confusions. You alone, of everyone who has tended him in 2 years, reached the frightened old man under the clouding mind and made him feel safe. And I am asking you, not commanding, asking, for I have no right to command this, to come to Kestgarth and be his companion, for whatever time he has left, and give him what no physician and no fortune can, which is to die at peace instead of afraid. I will pay you, of course, handsomely. A companion's wage. More, but I know already what you will say about the paying, so let me say the true thing instead, the thing that is not about payment. I am asking you to give my father a gentle death, because you are the only person alive who can, and because I love him, and because I cannot bear to watch him die frightened when I know there is a girl on the moor who could make his last months kind. Come to Kestgarth, Fenwin, not for me, for him. Give him what you gave him in the cottage. It is the greatest gift anyone could give my father now, and you are the only one who has it to give. Fenwin was quiet a long moment, and Renaud watched her weigh it. Not the wage, he could see. The wage meant nothing to her, but the thing itself, the leaving of her home, the going into a great cold house where she would be a poor nobody among sneering servants, the whole difficulty of it, and he watched her set all the difficulty aside for the one thing that outweighed it, which was that there was a frightened old man dying afraid and she could ease it. I'll come, she said, for him, not for the wage, which I'll take because a body must eat, but which isn't why, and you know it isn't, for the old man, because you're right, there's a difference between dying frightened and dying at peace. And I've sat with enough dying to know it's the truest difference there is, and if I can give him the peaceful kind, then I can't stay on my moor spinning while he dies afraid 2 hours off, any more than I could have walked past his ditch, so I'll come. I'll leave my hens with the widow Marsh, and I'll come to your great cold house, and I'll mind your father to his gentle end, and I'll try not to mind the sneering servants, who'll sneer, for a poor spinner set above them will always be sneered at, and I don't blame them for it. It's how the world's made. But I'll tell you 2 things first, sir, plainly, so there's no misunderstanding when I come. She held up one finger. First, I'll not be treated as a servant nor as a fine lady, but as what I am, which is a woman come to nurse a dying old man. And I'll answer to your father and to you in the matter of his care, and to no one else. And if your steward or your housekeeper thinks to order me about, they'll find I don't order easy. And second, she paused, and something crossed her face, some wariness he could not quite read. Second, sir, you'll not make more of my coming than it is. I've seen how you look at me this week. I'm poor, but I'm not a fool. And I'll come and mind your father gladly, but I'll not be, I won't have it thought by you or by your grand house that I've come for any reason but the old man, or that I'm angling for anything, or that a great duke's kindness to a poor nurse means what such kindness too often means. I come for your father, that's all. When he's gone, I go home to my moor. Give me your word on that, sir, that you'll not make it more than it is, and I'll come and give your father the gentlest end I can. That's my price, and it's the only one that matters, and it's not negotiable. And the Duke of Kestgarth, who had already begun to understand that he was going to make it a great deal more than it was, looked at the wary brave girl setting her honest terms, and gave her the word she asked for, and meant to keep it, and knew, even as he gave it, that keeping it was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done, because he had lost his heart in a spinner's cottage to a girl who wanted nothing from him, and was about to bring her under his own roof, and was going to have to spend her father's dying pretending he had not. She came to Kestgarth, and within a week the old Duke was easier, and within a month the whole cold house had begun, without quite knowing it, to warm, for Fenwin Nunnally could no more come into a cold house, and leave it cold than she could walk past a ditch, and the warming of Kestgarth, though she came only to nurse a dying man, was as inevitable as the warming of her own cottage. The servants sneered at first, exactly as she had foretold, a poor moor spinner set above them, given rooms and a companion's standing. Ordering the physicians about at a nobody's women, Fenwin bore it without complaint and without giving way, and won them one by one, the way she won everything, not by fighting but by being plainly, unanswerably good, until the sneering household of Kestgarth found itself, within a season, as devoted to the spinner as the tenants of her own moor had been, because she learned their names and troubled about their troubles, and treated the lowest scullery maid with exactly the same plain warmth she gave the old Duke. And there is no armour of contempt that long survives being met with genuine kindness that asks for nothing back. And Renaud watched it happen, and watched her, and kept his word not to make more of it than it was, and found the keeping harder every day. For he was falling ever deeper in love, and he could show none of it. He watched her tend his father with a tenderness that broke and mended his heart 12 times a day, watched her sit with the old man through his confusions, talking him gently back to calm. Watched her wheel his chair out into the winter sun on the good days and read to him and let him ramble. Watched her on the bad nights hold his frail hand through the terrors and sing to him, low, the old songs, until he slept and Renaud understood that his father was having, because of her, exactly the gentle dying he had prayed for and could not himself provide, and that he owed her for it a debt beyond all reckoning, and that he loved her past all sense, and that he could say none of it, because he had given his word. He learned, that winter, sitting with her by his father's bed in the long evenings, for he came every evening now, and they tended the old man together, and talked in low voices through the quiet hours. He learned why he had become the cold, hard man the world feared, and it was, at bottom, the simplest thing. He had had a cold, hard mother, and a warm, loving father, and the mother had died when he was young, and the father, old Auric, had been the one warm thing in a cold childhood, the one person who had loved Renaud plainly and without condition. But a duke's son is raised by the world as much as by his parents, and the world had taught Renaud at school and after that a duke must be hard, that warmth was weakness, that the way to rule and to survive among the great was to feel nothing and fear nothing and let no one close. And Renaud had learned the lesson and grown cold, and become the feared Duke of Kesgarth, and the only crack in the coldness, the only place the warm boy still lived, had been his love for his father, the one warm relationship he had never let the world freeze, and now his father was dying slowly. The last warm thing in his cold life guttering out, and just as it guttered, a poor girl had come and reached the warm boy under the cold duke exactly as she reached the frightened old man under the clouded mind, and Renaud felt himself thawing toward her, dangerously, helplessly, the last of his coldness melting in the warmth of a spinner who wanted nothing from him and had made him promise she never would. "You are the only warm thing in this house," he told her one evening, low, over his sleeping father, and it was as near as he let himself come to breaking his word. "Do you know that? Kesgarth has been cold my whole life. My mother was cold, and the world made me cold, and the only warmth I ever knew was him." He looked at his sleeping father, "and he is dying, and I have been dreading for 2 years the day the last warmth goes out of my life with him. And then you came, to nurse him, and you have warmed not only his dying but the whole house, and me, God help me, most of all, and I find I am less afraid of losing him now than I was, because you have shown me that warmth is not a single thing that can be used up and lost, but a way of being that can come into any cold place from outside and light it, and that even when he is gone, there will still be." He stopped himself, on the edge of the word he had promised not to say. "There will still be warmth in the world, and in this house while you are in it. That is all I meant. Forgive me. I gave you my word not to make more of your coming than it is, and I am keeping it, but it is very hard, Fenwin, when you are the warmest thing that has come into my whole cold life, to sit across my dying father from you every evening and say nothing of it. I keep my word, but I want you to know it costs me, so that you do not think me colder than I am. Under the cold duke there is a warm boy, and you have found him, exactly as you found the frightened old man under my father's clouded mind, and the warm boy is grateful, more than I can say, and that is all I will let myself say, because I promised, and I keep my promises, however they cost me." And Fenwin Nunnally looked at him across the old duke's sleeping form, and there was a colour in her cheeks and a trouble in her honest eyes, and she said very quietly, "You keep your promises, and I honour you for it, sir, and I'll not release you from this one, because it's the only thing keeping either of us sensible in a situation that has no sensible end. But I'll say one thing back, since you've said that much, and then we'll neither of us say more for both our sakes. You're not the only one finding it hard, that's all. That's all I'll say. You're not the only one." And she turned back to the old man, and would say no more, and Renaud sat across his dying father from the woman he loved and could not have, in the warm room she had made of his cold house, and understood that they were both of them keeping a promise that was breaking both their hearts, and that he did not know yet how it could possibly end, for a duke did not marry a spinner, and he had given his word, and his father was dying, and the whole impossible situation had no door out that he could see, however hard he looked. The winter of his father's dying was, for all its grief, the sweetest season of the Duke of Kesgarth's life, and he never afterward knew quite how to hold the two truths together, that it was the hardest time and the happiest, both at once. For the evenings at Kesgarth, that winter, became a thing he lived the whole day for. The quiet hours in his father's room, the two of them tending the old man together, and then, when the old Duke slept, the long low talks by the fire, the growing ease between them, the whole slow, careful falling in love that they conducted across a deathbed, in whispers, in the spaces between his father's confusions. They kept the promise, neither spoke of love, but love does not need to be spoken to grow, and it grew that winter. In every shared task, and every low conversation, and every wordless understanding, until the Duke of Kesgarth understood that he was more entirely, more helplessly in love than he had known a man could be, and that Fenwin was too. And that the promise between them had become a thin and trembling thing that held only because they both, from honor, insisted on holding it. He learned her those evenings, as he had never learned anyone. He learned the whole furniture of her mind, her plain, deep wisdom, got not from books but from a hard life lived with open eyes. Her dry humor, which came out once she was easy with him and could make him laugh aloud in a house that had not heard him laugh in years. Her fierce tenderness and the grief under it, for she had lost everyone, and knew loss from the inside, which was why she could tend his father's dying with such understanding. And she learned him the warm boy under the cold Duke, whom no one had reached in 20 years, and whom she reached without seeming to try. So that he found himself telling her things he had never told a living soul, the loneliness of his cold childhood, the fear behind the hardness, the whole hidden interior of a man the world knew only as feared. I have never talked to anyone the way I talk to you, he told her one such evening. Do you know that? I am the Duke of Kesgarth. I have 1,000 acquaintances and not one friend, not one person, in 34 years, that I could simply talk to, tell the true things to, be the warm boy with instead of the cold Duke. I learned young that a Duke cannot afford friends, that everyone wants something, that to be known is to be vulnerable, and I armored myself against being known, and I have been, in consequence, more alone than I think anyone has ever guessed, in the middle of all my consequence. And then you came to nurse my father, and I find I am telling you everything, the whole of myself, things I have never said aloud, and it is the strangest and best feeling I have ever had to be known, simply that. To be known by one person entirely, the warm boy and the cold Duke and all of it, and not to be feared or wanted or managed, but just known, and I think cared for anyway. I did not know how starved I was for it until you fed me. 34 years starving for the plain human thing of being known by one person, and never knowing I was starving, because I had armored myself so well I had forgotten the hunger. And you have fed it this winter in these evenings over my dying father and I. He stopped on the edge of the promise. I am grateful. That is all I will say. But I want you to know that whatever comes, whatever the end of this, you have given me a thing this winter I did not know a person have, which is to be known and cared for at the same time, and I will carry it the rest of my life, however the rest of my life goes. And Fenwin, across the sleeping old man, her eyes bright in the firelight, said, You've given me the same, you know. You think it all runs one way, the great lonely Duke, starved for a friend, fed by the kind nurse. But I've been lonely too, Reynold. I've been alone in the world since my grandmother died, no parents, no kin, no one, a poor spinner alone on a moor, keeping herself, with no soul to talk to but her hens. I've been as starved as you, only for different reasons, not because I armored myself, but because there was simply no one out on my moor to know me. And then a Duke wept on my floor for love of his father, and came to my fire. And I found I could talk to him as I've never talked to anyone since my grandmother died, and be known and be cared for, and it's fed a hunger in me as deep as the one in you. And I've told you things too this winter that I've never told a soul, so don't make it all one way. We've fed each other. Two lonely people from opposite ends of the earth, starved for the same plain thing, to be known, and we found it in each other, over your dying father, in these evenings, and it's the sweetest thing either of us has ever had, and it's why this promise we're keeping is breaking both our hearts. And it's why we have to keep keeping it, because if we once let it go, in a house where your father lies dying and the whole world's watching, will neither of us be able to stop, and it'll end in ruin. So we keep it. And we feed each other in the ways we're allowed the talk, the knowing, the caring, and we don't speak the rest. And we break our hearts a little every evening, and it's still, God help us, the happiest either of us has ever been. That's the truth of this winter, Reynolds. The hardest and the happiest both at once. Your father dying and us falling in love across his bed and neither allowed. I'll grieve this winter all my life, and I'll treasure it all my life, both at once. There's no other honest way to hold it. The world took notice, of course, as the world always does, and it came to Kestgarth in the shape of the Duke's aunt, Lady Sabra Vauncey, who arrived uninvited in the new year with the express purpose of putting a stop to whatever nonsense she had heard was occurring. She had heard, for the servants' gossip had spread, as such gossip does, out into the county and up into the great families, that the feared Duke of Kestgarth had installed a poor Moor spinner in his house, ostensibly to nurse his failing father, and that the Duke was seen to be uncommonly attached to her, and that there was talk, low disgraceful talk, of the Duke and the spinner. And Lady Sabra, who had a marriageable granddaughter she had long intended for Reynolds, and who cared for the dignity of the Kestgarth name as she cared for nothing else on earth, came to crush the spinner and recall her nephew to his senses. She did it at dinner, coldly, cruelly, in the way of a great lady who has decided a person beneath her is to be destroyed. She had Fenwin brought to dine, not out of courtesy, but so that she might do the destroying in front of witnesses. She spent the meal dissecting the girl, her poverty, her origins, her ignorance of the fashionable world, her presumption in sitting at a duke's table, each cruelty delivered in the sweet poisonous tone of concern. My dear, however do you manage, coming from where you come from, and you must feel so out of place. And one does admire your courage in attempting it, though of course everyone can see. And Fenwin bore it as she bore everything, with a plain steadiness that gave the old woman nothing but Reynolds watching, felt a fury rise in him that he had not felt since his father was lost, and understood that he was going to have to choose, that night, between his fury and his promise, and that the choosing would decide everything, for his promise bound him. He had given Fenwin his word not to make more of her presence than it was, not to expose her to exactly the sort of talk Lady Sabra was feeding, and to spring to her defence now, to declare himself, to fling his love in his aunt's face, would be to break that word, publicly, and to make Fenwin precisely the subject of scandal she had begged not to become. But to sit silent while his aunt destroyed her was unbearable. He was caught, exactly, between the word he had given and the woman he loved, and there was no way to honour both. He found the third door in the end, and it was Fenwin who showed it to him, without meaning to, for she rose, when Lady Sabra paused for breath, and she spoke quietly and settled the matter herself. Lady Vauncey, she said, you've spent this whole dinner telling me I'm poor and low-born and ignorant of your world, and out of place at this table, and I'll save you the trouble of the rest of it by agreeing with every word. I am poor. I am low-born. I know nothing of your fashionable world, and I never will. I am entirely out of place at this table, and I know it, and I've known it since I came, and I've sat here only because your nephew's dying father is the sweetest old soul I ever nursed, and I'll not leave his house while he needs me, whatever his fine relations think of me sitting at his table. So you needn't work to shame me, my lady. I'm not ashamed of being poor, for there's no shame in it, only hardship, but I know exactly what I am and what I'm not, and I've no illusions you could puncture, because I never had any to begin with. I came to nurse the old Duke. I'll nurse him to his gentle end, and then I'll go back to my moor, and you and your granddaughter and your fine world can have Kestgarth back, and no harm done, and no spinner in it. There. I've said the thing you came to make me feel, before you could finish making me feel it, and taken all the sport out of it, for there's no pleasure, is there, in humbling a person who humbles herself first and cheerfully. So let's have no more of it. Your nephew's father is dying in the next room. That's the thing that matters in this house tonight, not my birth. Shall we speak of something that signifies, or shall I go back to sitting with the old man, who at least, gulp him, has the excuse of a clouded mind for his unkindness, which is more than can be said for the sound of head? There was a silence at the table that Reynolds would remember all his life, and into it he spoke, and he found, in the speaking, that he could honour his promise and defend her both, for Fenwin had shown him the door. He need not declare his love to defend her dignity. He need only speak the plain truth of what she was, which shamed his aunt without exposing Fenwin to the scandal she feared. "My aunt came to Kestgarth," he said, "to protect the dignity of our name. I will tell her, and this table, where the dignity of our name actually resides. It does not reside in blood, or in fashion, or in the granddaughters of Lady Vansey. It resides in this, that when the old Duke of Kestgarth lay dying in a ditch on the moor, frozen and nameless and out of his wits, abandoned by a world that would have let him die there, one person in all of England stopped and took him in, and spent food and fuel she could not spare, and sat up 3 nights, and slept on her own cold floor, so that a nameless old man might have her bed, and asked nothing, and knew nothing of who he was, and would have done exactly the same had he been a beggar. That is where the dignity of the Kestgarth name resides tonight, not in you, who came to destroy the girl who saved your own brother, but in Fenwin Nunnally, who saved him. She is poor and low-born and out of place at this table, exactly as she says, and she is worth more than every titled soul in 3 counties, my own self included, and she saved the father I love from a nameless death in a ditch, and I will not have her insulted at my table by anyone, kin or no. You will apologize to her aunt, or you will leave Kestgarth tonight, and I will make no more of her presence here than that I have given her my word on it, and I keep my word, but that much I will make of it, before this table and before God, that she is the finest person in this house, and the reason my father is dying at peace instead of frozen in a ditch, and that anyone who forgets it will answer to me. It was the old Duke himself who broke the deadlock in the end. In one of the last clear intervals his failing mind was granted a mercy Reynolds would be grateful for to the end of his days. They came less often now, the clear intervals, and lasted less long. And Reynolds had learned to treasure each one as it came, for in them his father surfaced. Briefly, whole the warm, wise, clear mind he had loved his whole life, rising for an hour out of the fog before it sank again, and father and son could speak truly, as they had used to, before the clouding. And on an evening in the late winter, with Fenwin just gone from the room to fetch his broth, the old Duke surfaced, and looked at his son with clear eyes, and said, "You love her." Reynolds went still. "Do not trouble to deny it to me, Reynolds," his father said, gently. "I am old, and I am dying, and my mind is mostly gone. But it is not gone now, this hour, and I have watched you, in the clear hours, watch her, the girl, Fenwin, who found me in the ditch. I have watched you love her and hide it, and I have watched her love you and hide it. 2 of you keeping some foolish promise across my deathbed, breaking your hearts to spare each other, and I have not had the clarity until now to say the thing I have wanted to say for weeks, and I may not have it again, so I will say it now, quickly. While I am here," he took his son's hand in his frail one, "marry her. Father, marry her. Listen to me, Reynolds, for I will not be clear much longer, and this is the last important thing I will ever say to you, and I want you to carry it after I am gone. I have been a duke, and I have watched dukes my whole long life, and I have learned one thing above all others, which I failed to teach you because the world taught you otherwise, and I was too gentle to fight it, that rank is the least important thing about a person, and that the great tragedy of our kind is that we are taught to marry rank and to fear warmth, and so we marry cold women of good blood and raise cold children, and pass the coldness down, generation on generation. A whole class of people freezing themselves for the sake of a dignity that is worth nothing, that cannot love you when you are dying, that cannot find you in a ditch." His clear eyes held his son's. "That girl found me in a ditch, Reynolds. Not one of the fine ladies your aunt would have you marry would have troubled to stop. That girl warmed me, and slept on the floor for me, and has given me the gentlest dying a man ever had. And she did it for nothing, knowing nothing, out of the plain warmth that your whole class has bred out of itself. She is worth the whole of the peerage. And you love her, and she loves you, and you are both throwing it away for a promise and a fear, the fear that the world will talk, that a duke may not marry a spinner. Reynolds, I am dying. Let me tell you what matters, from the edge of the grave, where a man sees clearly. The world's talk is nothing. It lasts a season and is forgotten. But a warm marriage, a true love, a house full of warmth instead of the cold I raised you in, that is everything. That is the whole of what a life is for. And you have it in your hand, and you are letting it go for fear of a season's gossip. Do not. I forbid it. It is the last thing I will forbid you as your father, and I forbid it with my whole clear mind, this hour, before it clouds again. Do not let that girl go back to her more. Marry her. Break your foolish promise, she will forgive you. It was a promise made from fear, and love is allowed to break the promises that fear made. Marry her and be warm and give me, before I go, the one thing I want more than anything in this world, which is to know that my cold sun will not be cold after I am gone, but warm and loved, and married to the girl who found me in the ditch. Give me that, Reynald. Let me die knowing you will be warm. It is all I want. It is the last thing I will ever ask you. Reynald knelt by his father's bed with the old man's frail hand in both of his, and could not speak. I gave her my word, he managed at last, that I would not make more of her being here than it was. She asked it. She was afraid of the talk, afraid of being thought to have come for gain, and I promised. I cannot break my word to her, father, even for this. It would be to do the very thing she feared. Then do not break it, said the old Duke, and there was the ghost of his old shrewd smile. Ask her to release you from it. There is a difference. A promise is not a prison. It is a gift given to another, and the one who holds it may give it back. Go to her. Tell her you love her. No, better, let me tell her, for she gave the promise to you and cannot easily release you to your own asking. But she might release you to a dying old man's. Send her to me. Let me do this one last thing. Let me give my son and the girl who saved me the push that neither of them will give themselves. I am dying, Reynald. Let a dying man play the matchmaker. It is the pleasantest work I have had in months. Send her in. And trust me, my boy, as you have not always trusted me. Trust the warm, foolish old man over the cold, wise world. This once at the end, the world will tell you a duke cannot marry a spinner. I am telling you, from the door of the grave, that a duke cannot afford to marry anything else. That warmth is the only wealth, and you have found it, and I will not go into the dark until I know you have kept it. Send her in. Reynald brought her back in, and the old Duke, still clear, still holding to the surface with the last of his strength, did the thing he had promised, and it was the finest hour of his long dying. Come here, child, he said to Fenwin, and she came wary and knelt by the bed on the other side from Reynald, and took the old man's other hand, and the three of them were joined so, the dying father between his son and the girl who had saved him. I am clear now, Fenwin, you know how it comes and goes. It is clear now and will not be long, so listen. You gave my son a promise, that he would not make more of your being here than it was. You gave it out of fear of the world's talk, fear of being thought to have come for gain. I know. I have watched. You are transparent, child, to an old man with nothing left to do at watch, and I am going to ask you to give the promise back to him, to release him from it, not for his sake, for mine, because I am dying, and there is one thing I want before I go, more than anything in this world, and it is to know that my son will be warm and loved after I am gone, instead of cold and alone as his upbringing made him, and he loves you, and you love him. And only that foolish, frightened promise stands between the two of you and the warmth I am begging heaven to grant my boy. Release him, Fenwin. Give an old man his last wish. Let my son love you out loud before I go, so that I may die knowing he will not be alone. Fenwin's face was wet. My lord, she said, I can't. Not for the reasons you think, not because I don't. She stopped and started again plainer. I love your son. There. I'll say it to you, dying, though I've not said it to him. I love him, and it's broken my heart every day of this winter to sit across your bed from him and say nothing. But that's exactly why I can't release him, and I'll tell you why, and you're wise enough to hear it. If I release him, and he marries me, the whole world will say the thing I most fear, that the poor spinner nursed the old Duke to worm her way into the son's bed and the family's fortune, that it was all a scheme, that she saw her chance in a ditch and took it. And it won't only be said of me, it'll be said of him that the feared Duke of Kesgarth was galled by a scheming nurse, made a fool of, trapped. I can bear to be talked of. I can't bear for him to be. I'd rather go back to my moor with a broken heart and let him keep his dignity than marry him and be the ruin of his name and the proof, to all his world, that he was a fool. That's why I can't, my lord. Not because I don't love him, because I love him too well to be the thing that shames him. And the old Duke of Kesgarth, dying, looked at the girl with his clear fading eyes and smiled and said, Oh, my dear, you are exactly what I hoped. Do you not see that you have just given the only answer that proves you should marry him? A schemer worms her way in. A schemer takes the chance in the ditch, a schemer grasps. And you offered my son and my son's love, and the whole of Kestgarth are refusing it, to protect his name at the cost of your own broken heart. That is not what a schemer does, child. That is the opposite. Your very refusal is the disproof of the thing you fear. And here is how we shall answer the world, so that no one may ever say what you dread. His voice was failing now, but his mind held. I shall write it. Now while I am clear call my lawyer, Renauld. He is in the house. I shall set my hand to a document, witnessed, in my own clear mind, that says the whole truth, that this girl saved my life knowing nothing of who I was, that she refused every reward, that she came to nurse me for love and not for gain, that she refused my son's hand to protect his name, and that I, Alric, Duke of Kestgarth, of my own sound and clear mind, in the last days of my life, urged and blessed the match, and gave it my whole authority, as the dearest wish of my dying. Let the world talk against that. Let anyone dare call it scheming when the old Duke's own witnessed hand declares the girl refused the fortune, and had to be begged into the marriage by the dying father she saved. I shall make your love not a scandal, but the most honoured match in England, blessed by the old Duke's dying wish, on the record witnessed, past all gainsaying. That is the third door, children. I have found it, the way she found the door out of the ditch. Release my son, Fenwin, not to scheming, but to a marriage I have blessed and documented as the last act of my clear mind, and let me die having married my warm son to the warmest girl in England, and having, with my own dying hand, made it impossible for the world to call it anything but the honour it is. They called the lawyer. The old Duke, in that long clear hour, the last long clear hour he was granted, set his hand to the document he had described, plainly and forcefully, in the presence of witnesses, and it was everyone who read it after agreed, the act of a mind entirely sound. The last clear act of a great and dying man. And then, the thing done, the matter settled, the girl's fear answered, and his son's happiness secured, the old Duke of Kestgarth let go of the surface at last, and sank back into the gentle fog, and was, from that hour, mostly gone, but gone at peace. His great work done, having spent his last clarity not on himself, but on the warmth of his son, and the honour of the girl who saved him. He lived 3 weeks more, tended day and night by Fenwin and by Renauld together, and it was, Renauld thought, the strangest and tenderest time of his life, the two of them, betrothed now though not yet wed, sitting up together over his dying father, easing the old man's last confusions, and their new declared love growing in the quiet hours around the deathbed, so that his father's dying and their beginning were braided together into one long gentle passage. And when the old Duke died at last in his sleep, on a still night at the turn of spring, with his son holding one hand and the girl who had found him in the ditch holding the other, he died warm and easy and unafraid, the gentle death Fenwin had promised him and Renauld had prayed for, and Renauld wept over his father's body with the woman he was to marry beside him, and knew that his father had given him with his last clear strength not only permission but the woman herself, and the honour to hold her by, and a warmth to carry forward past the grave, so that the old Duke, dying, had done the one thing he wanted above all others. He had made certain his cold son would not be cold and alone, but warm and loved, for the whole of the life still ahead of him. They mourned the old Duke through the spring, and married quietly in the early summer, and the old Duke's document did exactly what he had foreseen. It turned what might have been the scandal of the season into the romance of the age, for the story could not be kept quiet. And Renauld did not try to keep it quiet. He did the opposite. He let it be known in full, exactly as his father's witnessed hand had set it down, how the old Duke had wandered lost in the storm, and been found dying in a ditch by a poor moor spinner who knew nothing of who he was. How she had saved his life at cost to her own scant living, and refused all reward. How she had come to nurse him to a gentle death, and warm the whole cold house doing it. How she had refused the young Duke's hand, though she loved him, to protect his name from the world's cruel tongue. And how the old Duke, with the last clear strength of his dying mind, had begged and blessed and documented the match, declaring the girl the finest soul in England and the saving of his life, against that story, told in the old Duke's own witnessed words. The cruel whisper of scheming had no purchase at all, for who could believe a schemer had refused the fortune and had to be begged into the marriage by the dying man she saved, and the county, which had watched the feared Duke of Kestgarth ride himself half to death, for love of his father, and weep openly in its village squares, and then honor the poor girl who saved that father, found that its long fear of the Duke had turned, over that strange winter, into something like love. So that when the Duke of Kesgarth married his spinner, the county did not sneer, but rejoiced, and told the story to its children, and Lady Sabra Vauncey found herself so thoroughly on the wrong side of the county's sentiment that she retreated to her own estates and troubled Kesgarth no more. Fenwyn Nunnerly became Duchess of Kesgarth, and warmed the great cold house that had been cold since the old Duke's clear mind first began to fail, and warmed it as thoroughly and as inevitably as she had warmed her own cottage, and the old man's dying, for she could no more be Duchess of a cold house than she could walk past a ditch. And the whole of Kesgarth, and then the whole of the 3 counties Reynolds ruled, began under her hand, and her husband's changed heart to thaw, and Reynolds thawed most of all, the last of his coldness, the coldness the world had bred, into a warm boy, melted entirely in the warmth of the woman his father had given him, for a man cannot marry warmth itself and remain cold, and the feared Duke of Kesgarth became, over the years of that marriage, a duke his father would have been proud of, the warm, wise, clear-minded kind of great man that old Auric had been before the fog, the kind Reynolds had loved and lost, and in loving Fenwyn, found the way back to being himself. He ruled his 3 counties in the years that followed, not with the cold, hard fear that had made him feared, but with the plain, warm care he had learned first from his father, and then more deeply from his wife, learning their names, troubling about their troubles, being a presence and not a distant power, so that the 3 counties, which had feared the Duke of Kesgarth, came in time to love him, and to bless the strange storm and the stranger ditch that had brought a warm spinner into a cold house, and thawed the whole of it. "I have been thinking," Reynolds said to Fenwyn, on the first anniversary of his father's death, standing at the old Duke's tomb, "about what my father did that last clear hour, the document, the blessing. He was dying. His mind had been going for 2 years. He had every reason to spend his last clarity on himself, on setting his own affairs in order, on farewells, on the fear a dying man is entitled to, and instead he spent it on us, on making certain his cold son would be warm after he was gone, on finding the door, the document that would protect you from the world's cruelty and free us to marry. He played the matchmaker from his deathbed, and found the 3rd door out of an impossible situation, and used the last clear hour of his failing mind to give me the whole of the happiness I have now. I owe him everything, Fenwyn. Not only my life, which he gave me at my birth, but this, my warmth, my marriage, my whole real self, which he gave me at his death, with his last clear strength, thinking of me instead of himself to the very end." His voice was not steady. "He was the warmest man I ever knew, and the world taught me warmth was weakness, and I grew cold, and nearly stayed cold my whole life, and he reached out of his own dying one last time, and gave me back the warmth the world had stolen by giving me you. That is the truest thing I know about my father, that even dying, even with his mind mostly gone, the one clear hour he was granted, he spent on the warmth of someone he loved. That is who he was. That is what warmth is, and I mean to be that, now, for the rest of my life, to spend myself on the warmth of the people I love, as he did, to the very end, so that when I die, my own children may stand at my tomb and say what I am saying at his, that he was the warmest man I ever knew, and he gave me, dying, the last and best of himself." The wedding, when it came, was the strangest a duke had ever made, and the county never forgot it. Reynolds would not marry his spinner in a great, cold, fashionable ceremony before the peerage, nor would he hide the marriage away in shame as some counselled, to spare the family dignity. He did what his father would have done, and what Fenwyn wished. He married her in the open, before the people, but not the fashionable people, the ordinary ones, the tenants and the villagers and the poor of the 3 counties who had heard the story and taken it to their hearts. He threw open the grounds of Kesgarth on his wedding day to anyone who wished to come, and they came in their thousands, the whole warm, ordinary population of 3 counties, come to see the feared Duke, whom they had watched ride himself half to death for love of his old father, marry the poor girl who had found that father in a ditch and saved him. It was their wedding as much as his. The story belonged to them, and they came to it not as spectators but as a kind of vast approving family, and the sound of their cheering when the Duke of Kesgarth kissed his spinner bride was heard. They said, 3 valleys off. For the county had changed its whole heart toward him, over the winter of his father's dying. They had feared the Duke of Kesgarth for years, the cold, hard man, the distant power, and then they had watched him weep openly in their village squares, searching for his father. Watched him honor a poor moor spinner before his own fine relations. Watched him tend his dying father with his own hands for 3 weeks. Watched him marry, in the teeth of the fashionable world, the nobody who had saved the old man. And a cold, hard, feared duke who does all that is no longer a cold, hard, feared duke. He is a man the people have seen weep and love and honor the poor, and the county's fear had turned, over that one winter, into a fierce proprietary devotion, so that they came to his wedding in their thousands to bless a match the fashionable world called a scandal, and would hear no word against it, and told the story to their children as the finest thing that ever happened in 3 counties. And Fenwin the poor spinner become Duchess did on her wedding day the thing that sealed the county's heart to her forever. In the middle of the celebration, in the height of it, with thousands cheering and the whole grounds of Kesgarth given over to feasting, she slipped away from the grand table. And Renauld, watching, saw her go, and followed at a distance, and found her at the edge of the crowd, kneeling in her wedding finery, beside an old beggar woman who had come with the rest and been overcome by the crowd and the heat, fainting at the fringe of the feast, found his bride. On her wedding day, in her wedding gown, down in the grass with a fainting old beggar's head in her lap, calling for water, tending her, exactly as she had once tended a nameless old man in a ditch, because she had seen someone in trouble and could not, even on her wedding day, in her wedding gown, walk past. Renauld knelt beside her in the grass, in his own wedding finery, and helped, and the old beggar woman came round, and was tended and fed and given a place, and it was, the county said ever after, the truest possible beginning to that marriage that the Duke and Duchess of Kesgarth had spent part of their own wedding day down in the grass, tending a fainting beggar, because neither of them could walk past a soul in need, not even on the happiest day of their lives. You could not even let your wedding day pass without stopping, Renauld said to her afterward, half laughing, half undone. In your wedding gown, for a beggar, the whole county watching. Someone was in trouble, Fenwin said simply, and I was there, and I could stop. The wedding gown changes nothing. The crowd changes nothing. A soul in need is a soul in need, wedding day or no. And I'll tell you, Renauld, I'm glad it happened. Glad the whole county saw it, and not for show, for I'd have done it in an empty field with no one by. But I'm glad they saw, because it told them better than any words exactly what kind of duchess they've got, one who'll stop, in her wedding gown, on her wedding day, for a fainting beggar, and always will, to the end of her days. Let them know it from the first. Let them know that being duchess won't change me, that I'll stop for them, everyone, always, whatever I'm wearing and whatever the occasion, because that's who I am and who I'll die being. It's the best wedding gift I could give them, not a feast, though the feast is fine, but the plain sight of their new duchess down in the grass with a beggar's head in her lap on her wedding day. That's a promise, that is, better than any I could speak. It's yours. I'll stop for you. Nothing's changed but the title, and they saw it and they know it now, and it's bound them to me tighter than any grand ceremony could. That's what your father knew, Renauld, and tried to teach you, and what I've always known, that the way to a people's heart isn't grandeur, it's stopping. That they'll fear grandeur and love stopping, and that a duchess who'll kneel in the grass for a beggar on her wedding day has won more hearts than 100 feasts. I didn't do it to win them. I did it because I couldn't do otherwise. But it won them, and I'm glad, because I mean to spend my life stopping for them, and now they know it, from the very first day, from my own wedding gown in the grass. And the Duke of Kesgarth looked at his bride, the poor spinner, who had stopped for his father in a ditch and stopped for a beggar on her wedding day, and would, he understood now, go on stopping for every soul in 3 counties for the rest of her life, and he thought that his father had been more right than even he had known, that a duke could not afford to marry anything but warmth, and that he had married the warmest soul in England, and that the whole cold line of Kesgarth was about to be warmed, from that wedding day forward, by a woman who could not walk past a ditch, or a beggar, or a fainting old woman at the edge of her own wedding feast, and that there was no finer beginning to a marriage, or a reign, or a life, than that. They had children, and raised them warm, in a warm house, and the Duke of Kesgarth watched his sons and daughters grow up in the thing he had been denied, and his father had wanted for him above all else the plain daily certainty of being loved, and the plain daily example of parents who could not walk past a person in need, for that was the thing Fenwin built her whole life as Duchess around, and taught her children as the first and deepest lesson, that you do not walk past the ditch. She had lived it before she could name it, and named it now and made it the family creed that a person's whole worth is shown in what they do when they come upon a stranger in trouble who can give them nothing, that the ditch is the one place the world is fair, where a duke and a beggar come to the same, a frozen man is only a frozen man, and that the measure of a soul is whether it stops. She had stopped at a ditch on the moor for a nameless old man, and it had brought her a duke and a dukedom and the whole of her life, but she had not stopped for the reward. There had been no reward in sight. She had stopped because she could not do otherwise, and that, she taught her children, was the whole of it. You stop because you cannot do otherwise, and you let the rewards, if any come, be surprises, and you never, ever calculate the stopping. The Duchess of Kesgarth became famous through the 3 counties for exactly this, for a habit of stopping that no amount of ducal dignity could break her of. She stopped for everyone, a great lady in a crested carriage, who would halt the carriage and get down at the sight of a person in trouble by the road, and stop and help and learn the name, and see the things set right, so that to be a traveller in distress in the 3 counties of Kesgarth became a thing not to be feared, but almost to be hoped for, since the Duchess herself might come by and stop. And there grew up, over the years, a whole countryside of people who had been stopped for, whom the Duchess had found in their own ditches and lifted out, and who blessed her name, and told the story, and stopped themselves for others, because she had stopped for them, and Reynald stopped with her. That was the change in him that his father had wanted, and would have most rejoiced to see the feared cold Duke of Kesgarth become a man who stopped, who got down from his horse at the sight of trouble, who ruled his counties by stopping one person at a time, until the 3 counties that had feared him could not remember why, so entirely had the stopping duke replaced the cold one. You have made stopping the law of Kesgarth, he told Fenwin once, watching her come in from some roadside rescue, muddy and cheerful. Do you know that? The whole county stops now for travellers, for the poor, for the lost. It has become the character of the place, the thing Kesgarth is known for, that its people stop. And it all comes from you, from a girl who stopped at a ditch for a nameless old man, and it has spread out from that one stopping across 3 whole counties, hundreds of people stopping for hundreds of others, on, because you stopped once, and married a duke, and made stopping the law of the land. My father wanted, above everything, to warm the cold world our kind makes, to breed warmth back into a class that had frozen itself. He could not do it. The world was too cold, and he too gentle to fight it, and you have done it without fighting anything, simply by stopping and being Duchess, and making the whole county stop with you. You have done my father's life's work, my love, the work he could not finish, warmed the cold world, 3 counties of it, one stopping at a time. He would be so proud. He gave you to me to warm his son, and you have warmed his son, and his son's house, and his son's children, and his son's 3 counties, and it did not stop, it will not stop, it will go on warming past all of us forever, because you cannot warm a place and have the warmth die when you do. It spreads and keeps spreading hand to hand, stopping to stopping, world without end. It's not my doing, Fenwin said, as she always said. It's only stopping. Anyone can stop. That's the whole beauty of it, Reynald. It costs nothing but a moment and a little trouble, and it's the one good thing that anyone can do. Poor or rich, high or low. The beggar can stop for the beggar, and the duke can stop for the duke, and the ditch makes equal in the stopping. I've done nothing anyone couldn't do. I've only stopped and gone on stopping, and let others see me do it, and stopping is catching like a yawn or a smile. One person stops, and the person they helped stops for the next, and it spreads without anyone making it spread. I didn't warm 3 counties. I just stopped, and it caught. That's the thing your father knew and wanted to spread and couldn't, from up in his great cold house, that the warming of the world isn't a grand work for great people. It's a small work for everyone. It's just stopping. And the reason the world stays cold isn't that warmth is hard, but people talk themselves out of the stopping. tell themselves it's not their business, that the parish will see to it, that they've troubles enough of their own, and the whole cure is just, don't, to talk yourself out of it. Stop, that's all. I stopped at a ditch because I never learned to talk myself out of stopping, and it cost me a hard week and gained me the whole of my life, and it would have been worth it even if it had gained me nothing, because the stopping is its own reward and always was. And I'd stop again tomorrow at any ditch for any nameless soul and take whatever came or nothing gladly forever, because that's the whole of what I am, and it's the whole of what I want our children to be, and it's the finest thing a person can be, and it costs nothing and anyone can do it. And almost no one does, and that is the only thing wrong with the world, and the only thing that would cure it, and it's as simple as stopping at a ditch. There came a day, years into the marriage, when the Duke of Carth came upon his own ditch and understood, stopping at it, the whole of how far he had travelled. He was riding alone on the moor road, the same road, near the same place, where his father had been found on a raw grey afternoon, and he saw, ahead, a dark heap at the road's edge that his younger self would have taken for a fallen sack or a dead sheep and ridden past. But the Duke of Kesgarth did not ride past anything any more, and he slowed and looked, and it was a person, an old woman, a poor traveller, collapsed at the roadside, half frozen, out of her wits with cold and age and exhaustion, exactly as his father had been. A nameless old soul dying in a ditch on the moor. And the Duke of Kesgarth got down from his horse, and knelt in the freezing mud, and gathered the old woman's grey head into his lap, and said the words he had once heard a poor girl say, that he had learned from her and made his own. "You'll not die in my ditch, mother, whoever you are. I've a roof and a fire and every comfort in 3 counties, and you'll have the share of all of it, and we'll argue about the rest when you're warm." He got her up, he the Duke of Kesgarth, who had never in his cold youth so much as spoken to a poor stranger, half carried a frozen old woman to his horse and got her up before him and rode with her held against his chest the 2 hours to Kesgarth, talking to her the whole way, low and steady, the way he had learned from Fenwin, the way Fenwin had once talked his own father back from the edge there now. "We're near, there's a fire, don't you die on me, I've carried you too far to let you die," and he brought her home, and she was warmed and fed, and tended by the whole warm household that Fenwin had made, and she lived, and she turned out to be nobody, a poor wandering widow with no one in the world. And the Duke of Kesgarth gave her a place at Kesgarth for the rest of her days, a warm corner and a small useful task and a home, because she had no one, and he had everything, and the arithmetic was that simple. He told Fenwin about it that night, and he was not entirely steady in the telling. "I found my own ditch today," he said, "on the moor road, near where you found my father. An old woman, frozen, nameless, dying exactly as he was, and I did not ride past. I got down, and I knelt in the mud, and I said your words, Fenwin, the ones you said over my father, that I've never forgotten, and I carried her home, and she'll have a place here now, because she has no one and I have everything." And Fenwin, his voice caught. "Do you understand what happened today? 12 years ago, the man I was would have ridden past that heap in the road without a second glance, would not even have seen it was a person, would have thought a frozen stranger no business of the Duke of Kesgarth's. And today I stopped, without thinking, without deciding stop the way you stop, because I could not do otherwise, because the not stopping had become impossible to me, because you have made me, over 12 years, into a man who cannot ride past a ditch. That is what you have done to me. You have not only warmed me, you have remade me into the kind of man who stops so completely that I did it today without a thought, as naturally as breathing, a frozen old woman in a ditch, and me down in the mud beside her before I had even decided to be. I have become you, Fenwin, or the version of you that a duke can be, and I stood in that mud today with a dying stranger in my arms, and I thought, this is what my father wanted, this exactly. Not that I should marry warmth, but that I should become warmth, that the stopping should go all the way into me, until I did it without deciding, until I was the kind of man who could not ride past a ditch, and I am, you made me. And I have never in my life been so grateful for anything as I was, kneeling in that mud today, to discover that the cold man I was is gone, entirely gone, and in his place is a man who stops, and that it happened without my noticing, over 12 years of loving you, until it was simply who I am. That's the best thing you could ever tell me, Fenwin said, and she was weeping now too. Not that you love me, though I never tire of that. That you stopped today without thinking. 'Cause that's the proof it's real, Reynolds, the deepest proof there is. Anyone can decide to be kind once with an effort. But when the kindness goes so far into you that you do it without deciding, without effort, as naturally as breathing when you find yourself in the mud, beside a stranger before you've even chosen to be, that's when it's stopped being a thing you do and become a thing you are, and you are it now. The stopping is you. 12 years ago it was an effort, a thing you learned from me, a duty you took on, and today it was just you down in the mud before you thought. That's the whole journey, my love, from doing kindness to being it, and you've made it. Your father would weep to see it. He gave you to me to be warmed, and you've gone past warmed, you've become a source of warmth yourself, one that stops without thinking, that others will learn from as you learned from me, on and on. That's the finest thing a person can become, and you've become it. And I've watched it happen over 12 years, an inch at a time, and today, in the mud, it was finished, and I've never loved you more than I do tonight, knowing that if I died tomorrow the stopping would go on, 'cause it isn't mine anymore, it's yours too now, all the way down, forever. The proof that the warmth had truly taken, that the cold inheritance had been switched at last to a warm one, came to the Duke of Kesgarth through his eldest son. On an ordinary day when the boy was 9, the child came home muddy and late from a ramble, and the nurse was cross. And it came out that the boy had found on the moor road an old drover fallen ill by the way, and had stopped, and stayed with him, and sent another passing child running for help, and would not leave the sick old man until the help came. The boy said, puzzled that anyone should ask, "You don't leave someone in the road," and he had got muddy and late and missed his dinner over it, and could not understand why the nurse was cross, because he had done the only thing there was to do. Reynolds heard it, and had to leave the room. He found Fenwin and told her, and could barely get it out. He stopped, he said. 9 years old, found a sick old man on the moor road and stopped and stayed, and would not leave him, and when they asked him why, he said, "You don't leave someone in the road." As though it were the most obvious thing in the world, as though there were nothing to explain, as though it had never once occurred to him that a person might do otherwise. Do you understand what that means, Fenwin? He has it. Not as a lesson we taught him, not as an effort, a duty, a thing he decided. He has it the way you have it, all the way down, so deep he cannot imagine doing otherwise, so natural he is puzzled that anyone should ask why. Our son cannot walk past a ditch, and he does not even know it is a remarkable thing, because to him it is simply how one is. The cold inheritance of Kesgarth, 200 years of it, the cold that made my mother and the world that made me, it is gone, switched. Our son inherited warmth so completely that he takes it for granted, as you took your grandmother's warmth for granted, as the most natural thing in the world. We did it, Fenwin. We switched the whole line. He is the proof. He stopped on the moor road today at 9 without a thought. And he will stop all his life, and his children will stop, and the cold that came down the Kesgarth blood for 200 years is broken forever, replaced with the warmth that came down to you from your grandmother, and it is in our son now, all the way down. And he does not even know it is anything but ordinary, which is exactly how you know it is truly his. That's how you know it's real, Fenwin agreed, weeping and smiling. When they don't know, it's remarkable. When they're puzzled that you'd even ask. That's when it's gone all the way in, when stopping isn't a virtue they practice, but simply the air they breathe, the only way they can imagine being. Your father wanted, above everything, to warm the cold line he was part of, and couldn't from inside it. And our son stopped on the moor road today at 9, and was puzzled anyone should ask why, and that's your father's dream come true. 3 generations on, in a muddy boy who missed his dinner for a sick drover. The line is warm now, Reynolds. All the way down, it'll stay warm. Our son will see to that, and his children and theirs, and none of them will know it was ever cold, or that it was switched, or that it all turned on a poor girl stopping at a ditch and a dying duke begging his cold son to marry her. They'll just stop, all of them, forever, because they can't imagine doing otherwise, and that's the finest monument your father could have, and my grandmother, and the 2 of us, a line that stops forever, and doesn't even know it's remarkable. Go and hug your muddy son, Reynolds. Don't scold him for the dinner. He did the only thing there was to do, and he's the proof that everything we hoped has come true, and he doesn't even know it, and that's exactly as it should be. They grew old together at Kesgarth, the once cold duke and the spinner who had stopped at a ditch, and the great house was warm around them to the end, and the 3 counties they ruled were warm, and the warmth went on spreading pole reckoning, stopping to stopping down the years. Their children grew and stopped, and taught their own children to stop, so that the creed of the ditch went down the generations of Kesgarth as the cruelty and coldness of great houses usually go down, only in reverse. Warmth breeding warmth where cold had bred cold. All of it flowing from a poor girl who could not walk past a dying stranger and a dying duke who had begged his son, with his last clear hour, to marry her. The story became the founding legend of the family, told to every child of Kesgarth. How their great-grandfather, the old duke, was lost in a storm and found in a ditch by a poor spinner who knew nothing of who he was. How she saved him for nothing and nursed him to a gentle death and refused every reward. How the old duke, dying, begged and blessed and documented the match. And how the whole warmth of Kesgarth, generation upon generation, flowed from that one stopping at a ditch on the moor. The children knew it by heart. They knew the words Fenwin had said over the old man in the ditch, that Reynolds had said over the old woman years later, that had become the family's watchword. You'll not die in my ditch, whoever you are. And they said them in their turn over the strangers they stopped for, on, so that the words spread across the counties and down the years, a small warm creed loose in the world, doing its quiet endless work, on an evening near the very end. The old Duke of Kesgarth walked with his old Duchess out onto the moor road slowly now, both of them grey to the place where it had all begun. The place where a poor girl had once found a dying old man in a ditch and changed the whole course of 2 lives and 3 counties and generations yet unborn. I have thought, all these years, Reynolds said, about how nearly it never happened. If you had done the sensible thing and gone to the village, and let the parish deal with the body in the ditch, if you had been the sort of person the world is mostly made of, my father would have died that night, nameless, frozen, alone, and I would never have known you. And I would have lived and died the cold, hard, feared Duke of Kesgarth, unwarmed, unloved, exactly as my father dreaded, and the 3 counties would be cold still, and none of the stopping would exist. And all the strangers you and I and our children and their children have lifted out of their own ditches would have died in them. All of it, the whole warm world we made hung on one poor girl, on one cold night, choosing not to walk past a ditch. It frightens me how nearly it never was. It doesn't frighten me, Fenwin said, taking his old hand, because I could no more have walked past that ditch than I could have stopped my own heart, and so it was never really so near a thing as it looks, for there was never a version of me that walked past. That's the whole comfort of being the kind of person who cannot do otherwise. You needn't fear the near misses, because there were none. You were always going to stop. It was never in doubt. I've thought about it too, all these years, what if I'd walked past. And I've decided it's not a real what if, because it wasn't in me to walk past, any more than it's in you now, after 12 years and a woman in the mud. We're the kind that stops. It's not a choice we make at each ditch. It's who we are. And so there was never any real danger that I'd have walked past your father, because I couldn't have, and there's the whole of it. The frightening thing isn't that I nearly walked past. It's how many people would have, how many did that night on that road before I came, for I wasn't the first to pass that ditch, Reynolds. I've always known it. Others went by before me and saw the heap and rode on, told themselves it was a sack or a sheep or none of their business. That's the frightening thing, not that I nearly walked past. That so many others actually did and thought nothing of it, and your father would have died of their walking past if one person hadn't been made unable to. That's why we teach the children. Not so they'll be brave enough to stop. Stopping takes no bravery. So they'll be the kind that cannot walk past. So that there'll always be someone at every ditch who couldn't ride by if they wanted to. That's the whole work of a life, I've come to think. Not to do great things. Just to become, and to raise others who'll become, the kind of person who cannot walk past a ditch. If enough of us are that, there'll be no one left dying in the ditches. And that's the warm world your father dreamed of, and we've made a little of it, 3 counties worth, and our children will make more, and there's more, until who knows, until maybe the whole world stops. It began at this ditch. It won't end at any. And they stood together on the moor road in the evening, at the place where a poor girl had once stopped for a dying stranger, the old Duke and the Duchess who had made a warm world out of one cold night's kindness, and Ranald, Duke of Kesgarth, raised wife his old hand to his lips, and gave thanks as he had every day for a lifetime for the ditch and the storm, and the poor girl who could not walk past, and the warm dying father who had begged his cold son to marry her, and for the whole long warm improbable life that had grown, past all deserving, from one soul stopping, on one cold night, at one ditch on the moor, because she could not do otherwise, and never could, and had passed that blessed inability down through him and their children into a world that was, because of it, a little warmer than it would otherwise have been, and would go on warming, ditch by ditch, stranger by stranger, stopping by stopping, long after the two of them were gone.